It's Friday, April 12th, 1861. It's 4:29 in the morning. Major Robert Anderson, a Kentuckian, knows that his good friend and former student, Pierre Gustave Toutant Beauregard, is about to fire at him, and there's nothing Anderson can do about it. He's tried to plead to Beauregard to stall the firing, but those have fallen on deaf ears. Anderson is outgunned. He's outmanned. He's almost out of food. And he's been waiting for over an hour, clock ticking. Then, at 4:30 in the morning, he hears it. The shell being launched from a mortar, flying through the air and exploding right over his head here at Fort Sumter. That is a signal for 8 other batteries all along Charleston Harbor to begin the bombardment, a bombardment that will last 34 hours on Fort Sumter. And there's nothing Anderson can really do about it. This is the first shots of a Civil War.
Charge.
I am here at Fort Sumter National Monument, site of where the very first shots of the Civil War took place. And after 34 hours of bombardment, which is something that we're going to be looking at, we're also going to be looking at how did the nation respond? What was it like in the northern states? What was it like in the southern states? And what was it like in our own border states, such as Kentucky? But before we get into that, remember to make sure you hit that subscribe and notifications bell so you know anytime I upload any of these Civil War stories that I like to share with you guys, or any of my other classes such as film study and recent U.S. history. Now back here to Fort Sumter, 34 hours of bombardment. But before we start that, let's rewind just a little bit. There were 10 different states that did not even list Abraham Lincoln on the 1860 presidential ballot, yet he was still elected as the 16th president of the United States. The president-elect, who had previously shared, "I believe that this government cannot endure permanently half slave and half free," was a perceived threat to slavery by South Carolinians, and was not on the Palmetto State's ballot. Therefore, on December 20th, South Carolina formally seceded from the United States. A small Union garrison under the command of Kentuckian Major Robert Anderson was stationed at Fort Moultrie. The fort, which had an excellent view of the still being constructed Fort Sumter, was designed for coastal defense and had been around since the American Revolution. However, the fort was not made for a land defense. It's December 26, 1860, and Major Anderson is here at Fort Moultrie, and he realizes, you know what? Cows can easily walk over these fortification hills, and if the cows are walking over the fortification hills, it would be pretty difficult to defend against a Confederate attack, or a South Carolinian attack at this point, because it's not the Confederacy yet. So, in the middle of the night on December 26, Major Anderson hightails out of here and goes and takes over Fort Sumter, which hadn't been completed. Does this in the middle of the night on December 27th. The next day, the people in Charleston see this humongous American flag flying, and they're like, whoa. And Major Anderson's like, "Merry Christmas, Charleston. Merry Christmas." Anderson's stealth movement in the dark of night from Fort Moultrie to Fort Sumter angered the people of South Carolina, who viewed the move as being hostile. President James "I'm a lame duck" President Buchanan, who is more than eager to get his one term as president over with and the heck out of Washington, D.C., half-heartedly sends the boat called the Star of the West with resupplies to Fort Sumter. However, as the ship approached Charleston, it was fired upon, causing the captain to say, "Nope, not going to do it." The boat, without hesitation, turned around and headed back. Buchanan, most likely the worst president in U.S. history, is very much like, "Well, I tried." This means Robert Anderson and his men are left on their own. By February 2nd, 1861, 6 more states will have seceded from the Union: Mississippi, Florida, Alabama, Georgia, Louisiana, and Texas. And they elected the Kentucky-born Jefferson Davis as President of the Confederate States of America. Meanwhile, during his inaugural address in March, President Lincoln tried to calm the nation and build healing. However, he also shared that he would hold, occupy, and possess federal property. The people of Charleston, South Carolina knew exactly what that meant. Lincoln was going to keep the American flag flying in front of one of the South's most important ports. On April 9th, 1861, President Jefferson Davis orders newly commissioned Pierre Gustave Toutant Beauregard to seize Fort Sumter. Beauregard, who was the first commissioned brigadier general in the Confederacy, was born outside of New Orleans and was a proud French Creole. While studying at West Point, the little Creole became friends with one of his instructors, Robert Anderson. Now, General Beauregard has to inform his former instructor and very dear friend, Major Robert Anderson, that he has orders to seize the fort. Beauregard sends 3 officers along with a case of whiskey, brandy, and fine cigars to Anderson on April 10th. Anderson, though, has a duty to serve the nation and turns down the gifts and Beauregard's plea to leave. I do have to wonder, though, if PGT had sent Anderson some fine Kentucky bourbon, if the Kentuckian would have been a bit more tempted to leave. Major Anderson sees the forces that Pierre Gustave Toutant has built up around him. Beauregard has 8 battery positions all around Charleston Harbor, including Fort Moultrie and Fort Johnson. The Creole has also amassed over 50 cannons and mortars, which are all able to fire over Fort Sumter's walls, and additionally has a massive army. Beauregard has at least 500 men, but there are reports that he had nearly 6,000 men. Record keeping at this point of the war, it's not really accurate. Anderson, the teacher, would have to have been extremely proud of Beauregard, the student, for the brilliant layout. Unfortunately, all of those guns of a student are now being pointed at the teacher. Meanwhile, Anderson has just under 80 men and can only safely fire 6 cannon. 6! On top of all of that, his guns were meant to fire straight at naval ships and not really able to project high enough to reach Confederate land forces. Additionally, Anderson is running out of food. He knows there is no way he can hold against a Confederate attack. On April 11th, Beauregard once more pleads with his friend to depart the fort. This time, though, Anderson responds by sharing he only has 3 days of food left, and by the 15th, he will have to abandon the fort. What Anderson doesn't know, and Beauregard does know, though, is Lincoln has already dispatched reinforcements, and Beauregard cannot wait. On the early hours of April 12th, at 3:30 in the morning, Pierre Gustave Toutant Beauregard sends a final warning to his friend, Major Robert Anderson, that in 1 hour he would start the bombardment. And this brings us back to where we started. Anderson is outgunned. He is outmanned. Literally has no options. And at 4:30 in the morning, the bombardment begins. To keep his men as safe as possible, Anderson will withhold return fire until 7 a.m. And that is when he allows Union Captain Abner Doubleday to fire the first return shot. And yes, for baseball fans, it's that Abner Doubleday. Now, quick side note. In 1907, Major League Baseball appointed the Mills Commission to discover the origins of baseball. And after an extensive investigation, the commission gave credit to Doubleday for inventing the game in 1839 in New York. However, there is no record of this, nor did Abner Doubleday ever make a claim of actually creating the game. Therefore, historians now have refuted the claim. Although, as a Union officer though, Doubleday will continue to get promoted, eventually to the rank of Major General. And as he continues to get promoted, he will make sure his troops have baseball bats and balls as a form of recreation. So, did he invent a game? Debatable. But if he did invent a game, he clearly helped spread the game's popularity. Major Anderson is not daring to put his troops up on top, being vulnerable to the Confederate bombardment. Under here in these bunkers is where his troops, and again, well outmanned, well outgunned, are going to be at the safest. And out of 34 hours of bombardment, not one Union soldier is going to be injured from that entire bombardment. But the problem with him firing his guns back is because he can't put his guys up there to spot how his artillery is doing. He's simply having to look out the windows when he's shooting. And he doesn't have that many guns to be able to shoot with. So as he's peering through, his men are peering through these windows, firing a shot, the smoke creates no visibility, so they have no clue if they're short, if they're long, if they're right, if they're left, because the smoke, by the time it clears, the splash of the explosion is gone. It's evaporated, and there's no way of them knowing how they're doing. So it's pretty much a useless effort by Major Anderson to even fire back. Matter of fact, some of the Confederates, though, just in amusement, actually cheer each time that the Union fires. Sort of like, all right, boys, good job. You're trying, and we appreciate that. The continued Confederate bombardment eventually caused the fort to catch fire. And after 34 hours, Major Robert Anderson agrees to evacuate the fort. Amazingly, after 3,000 rounds fired upon the fort from Beauregard, and the occasional round fired back by Anderson, neither side suffered a casualty. 34 hours, 3,000 rounds, not one casualty. One condition of the evacuation that Anderson asked is that he is allowed to have a 100-gun salute as the American flag is brought down. PGT agrees. But unfortunately, while during the salute, a powder keg prematurely ignites, accidentally killing Union privates Daniel Howe and Edward Galloway, the first two casualties of the American Civil War. Robert Anderson will return to the North. He is certain he will be court-martialed for allowing Fort Sumter to fall. However, he will be viewed as a hero instead, and the flag that flew over the fort will be used as a rallying marketing piece for Union sentiment. Much like Remember the Alamo, now it's Remember Sumter. President Lincoln will call for 75,000 volunteers that will serve 3 months, and the northern states quickly respond. Heck, Ohio alone had 75,000 volunteers within 16 days. Thus, thousands of prospective enlistees will go to sign up and be told, "We're all good here. You're not needed. You can go back home." Short-sighted much? 75,000 men for only 3 months? By the war's end in 1865, the Union will have had over 2.7 million troops. 75,000? However, once President Lincoln called for 75,000 volunteers to subdue the South,
4 more states, Virginia, North Carolina, Tennessee, and Arkansas, will also join the Confederacy. These states will give the South much needed industry, large populations, and a Tennessee breadbasket. Additionally, the Confederacy will now move their well-protected capital in Mobile, Alabama, to Richmond, Virginia, less than 90 miles away from Washington, D.C. Thus, this will ensure that Virginia will be a thrashed field of combat. So how did the border states of Delaware, Maryland, Missouri, and Kentucky respond? Well, first let's take a look at Delaware. Wait, Delaware? Really? We're looking at Delaware first? It's Delaware.
Whisked away to Delaware. Hi, I'm in Delaware.
Fortunately for the Union, the Fighting Blue Hens stay with Lincoln. Maryland will be important for Lincoln, though, to hold, as the capital has Virginia to one side, and the 3 remaining sides are surrounded by Maryland. If Maryland goes to the Confederacy, the capital is completely surrounded. 5 days after Fort Sumter, as brand new Massachusetts troops hop off a train in Baltimore and were marching through the streets to catch another train bound for D.C., a Southern sympathy mob accosted the soldiers, eventually leading to guns being fired. 4 soldiers and 12 civilians will be killed in a riot. Lincoln, in one of his most important moments of brilliance, was still able to negotiate, though, to keep Maryland with the Union. Meanwhile, in Missouri, it will practically have its own civil war, as the Governor Claiborne Fox Jackson, and those that are sympathetic to the Confederacy will be known as bushwhackers. The majority of the state, including the legislative, though, will be Union supporters. Eventually, the state will claim to have both a Confederate state capital in Neosho and the Union capital, true state capital, in Jefferson City. Although Missouri will not see the major battle seen elsewhere, it will truly be a bloody example of brother against brother, with more than 1,200 skirmishes in the state. And that finally leaves us with the Commonwealth of Kentucky. Much like Missouri, Kentucky had a Southern sympathizing governor and a Union loyal legislative. Governor Beriah Magoffin even promised, "Kentucky will furnish no troops for the wicked purpose of subduing her sister Southern states." But unlike Maryland or Missouri, Lincoln will not press Kentucky. Instead, he will allow Kentucky to remain neutral. The Kentucky-born Lincoln will even state, "I hope to have God on my side, but I must have Kentucky." The American Civil War began with shots fired by a former student upon his teacher on April 12, 1861. And Fort Sumter will see the Confederate flag raised high above the fort on April 14th. For the first part of the war, though, the fort will see very little action. However, by 1863, that changes.
From 1863 to 1865, Fort Sumter is going to find itself once more under siege, and in the longest siege in military history for the U.S., because it's going to go from the summer of 1863 to the spring of 1865, and that's only going to be when Charleston evacuates with Sherman's forces coming through. But Confederate guns that were placed here at Fort Sumter were used to help protect from the Union Navy or Union attacks. And right behind me, right over there, is Morris Island, which is probably well known to you guys as where Fort Wagner or Battery Wagner is going to be. What makes Battery Wagner so important on Morris Island over there? Well, it's the setting for the Oscar-winning film Glory, where the 54th Massachusetts, in a heroic moment, charged the fort.
William Tecumseh Sherman, the Union general that will cause the Confederates to abandon the fort in 1865, at the outbreak of the war gave a stern warning to his Southern friends. He promised they were doomed due to the simple numbers. And when we look at those numbers, he's right. The North had a population of over 20 million, whereas the South's population was nearly 5 million, with 4 more additional million people that were enslaved. Sherman knows that the war is about attrition. With nearly a 4-to-1 advantage, the Union is going to be destined to win the war. Additionally, the North had 90% of all of a nation's industry. 70% of all the railroad lines in the country were found in the North. That's key to moving goods and troops, as well as 100% of all the factories that built railroad supplies and equipment were found in the North. The nation's natural resources of coal, iron, copper, and metal were all, for the most part, found in the North. Over 80% of the nation's bank deposits found in the North. Most of the nation's major shipping ports were also located in the North. And the majority of the nation's foodstuff, such as wheat, corn, cattle, were all located in the North. Now you might be thinking, but wait, isn't the South agricultural? Why would they not have the major food source? And yes, the South was agricultural, but its focus was on growing cotton, tobacco, and rice. As you can see on paper, this will not be a contest, yet the Civil War was. And what any good coach will tell a reporter after a major upset, what's on paper doesn't determine the outcome of the game. You see, the South had home field advantage, which becomes unmeasurable. When an invading superior force comes for your churches, schools, and homes, well, the heart finds a way to be resilient and fights with a passionate resolve. This is unmeasurable on paper. And speaking of an agricultural society of the South, it also provided an advantage that was not on paper, but made a very real impact because the culture was familiar with hunting. Many Union volunteers came from urban homes and never fired a rifle, but a heavy majority of the Southern soldiers had fired a gun from their earliest of days. Additionally, those young men of the college age in the North had numerous institutions to choose from, including Ivy League schools such as Harvard and Yale. But for the Southerner, the desired school was West Point, and so the Confederacy will have the advantage of officers with military training. Finally, the sheer geographic land size of the Confederacy gave the South one other additional advantage. That size, that overwhelming size, meant that an unfathomable number of Union soldiers were going to be needed to conquer the South. One voice of Confederate objection to the attack on Fort Sumter was Confederate Secretary of State Robert Toombs. Toombs did not share the enthusiasm of Jefferson Davis and the rest of his cabinet in regards to making an attack on Sumter. Instead, the Georgia politician blasted Davis for ordering an attack. Toombs proclaimed, "Mr. President, at this time it is suicide, murder, and will lose us every friend in the North. You will wantonly strike a hornet's nest which extends from the mountain to ocean, and legions now will swarm out and sting us to death. It is unnecessary. It puts us in the wrong. It is fatal." Spoiler alert, Mr. Toombs was right.
On April 14th, 1865, 4 years after Major Robert Anderson had pulled down the flag from Fort Sumter, now a retired Major General, Anderson returns to Fort Sumter and raises that same flag that he pulled down back up as a powerful image of the war coming to an end. It should have been major headline news, front pages. This is a symbolic moment for the United States. The same flag that Major Robert Anderson pulled down, now as Major General, he's lifting up on April 14th, 1865. But it does not make page one news because that evening, President Lincoln will be shot by John Wilkes Booth.
The deaths of Daniel Howe and Edward Galloway at Fort Sumter will be the first two of the Civil War. Please, though, think about this. When we add up the military dead from the American Revolution, the Indian Wars, World War I, World War II, Vietnam, Desert Storm, Iraq, and Afghanistan, that total number combined comes to nearly 650,000. The military deaths of the American Civil War? Originally, records indicated 650,000, the exact same as all of those other wars combined. However, as historians continue to study the Civil War, that number has increased. Soldiers that died of their wounds after the war now have been included. Additionally, since Desert Storm, we have developed a better understanding of PTSD and how it impacts mental health and mortality after deployments. With this knowledge and the ability to review deaths of soldiers following the war, the number of Civil War dead has risen from 650,000 to 700,000. And there are some that estimate that number could be as high as 850,000. This horrific number is why we need to study this conflict so we can honor those that fought to preserve the Union.
All right, guys, I'm here with a very special guest today, Park Ranger Alex Barbee, and she's going to share some of her insight and wisdom of being a ranger. How long have you been here?
I've been here since the beginning of 2019.
2019. So she's going to share some thoughts and insight, and she will let you know she is not just a Civil War nerd, but
I'm a former cast member for the Walt Disney Company. I was a Disney character for about 4 years.
There you go. All right, guys.
I always urge visitors to do is to try to slide themselves into the shoes of Major Anderson. So imagine this, you're sitting inside of a fort that is literally about to blow up because there is a fire and it's getting close to a powder magazine, which is a room full of gunpowder. So he's worried about his men's life already, so he's already stressing about that. And then he gets to this point, he's like, you know, I need to save these guys. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna go evacuate, I'm gonna take Beauregard up on his terms, so it will not be a formal surrender and there will be no prisoners of war, which is a huge thing. However, imagine this. As an officer, you're commanding this garrison that basically is sitting in the cradle of secession, and you choose to evacuate this federal fort, handing it over to this newly formed Republic of South Carolina. I mean, me personally, if I was in his shoes, I would be incredibly stressed. I would be worried about what Buchanan, the president at the time, could do, let alone what the United States military could do. I mean, he obviously was incredibly scared about being court-martialed on his way back to Kentucky. And I'm imagining that that entire boat ride back would have been the most stressful, however many hours that would have taken. Then on top of that, actually, because of the first death of the American Civil War, when there was a cannon misfire on the flag lowering ceremony, or salute, that pushed back their departure time for the boat. So they were stuck outside of Fort Sumter's walls for an entire, basically, night, essentially, listening to the Confederates party for all intents and purposes about, you know, rejoicing. They just took this federal fort, you know, they're now their own actual independent republic, they're now their own country, and they won essentially the first battle. That would have been an icky feeling. However, when he does arrive in New York, I mean, he's renowned as a hero. He's the defender of Fort Sumter. So for him, I bet there'd be a lot of self-blame too. I mean, in my personal opinion, I would feel that way because, again, you left this federal fort in the hands of this newly formed republic that the president doesn't support. And yeah, sure, you're being renowned as a hero and thank goodness you're not being court-martialed, but there's gotta be a little bit of personal guilt surrounding that. Okay, boys at Trinity High School, I'm gonna tell you why. I'm a huge Civil War nerd. Let's just start there. Like, I love Disney and the Civil War, and I've seen almost every battlefield in this country. I'm one of those people. I got into the Civil War because I saw girls in antebellum South dresses, thought they were Disney princesses. So I am more normal than I am a classic history nerd. This was the first site where there was an artifact that really hit me close to home, and it was those bricks with the fingerprints in them. So there are about 5 million bricks, 4 million or so, that would make up this fort, or would have back in the day. And they were all made by enslaved workers. And there are about 7 bricks in this fort with fingerprints in them from children who were enslaved. That is something that is irreplaceable and is, in my opinion, the most sobering artifact you could ever see. That is why you need to come to Fort Sumter.
All right, guys, once again, thank you for being a part of this class discussion and following along. Again, if you have any comments or questions, what do you think it was like for our fellow Kentuckian, Major Robert Anderson, to think that he possibly started the war only to come back to New York and realize he was lauded as a hero? What do you think about Beauregard trying to bribe his former teacher to try to get out of this firing? Leave a comment below and make sure you subscribe. Guys, as always, remain awesome, be nice, stay safe. See you soon.